Ever since its inception, psychology has always placed immense significance on the role of a parent in the development of a child. And my guest today, Onkabetse Rethabile Masobe, has written a book focusing on the relationship between a daughter and a father. The name of the book is Daddy Issues, and it's up on the shelf if you're keen on what it looks like. Rita, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Keenan. I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be interesting for anybody listening. And what I'd like to start off with is your book recounts the story of 9 different women from different backgrounds, and each of them have a different relationship with their father, had different dynamics at play. And your stories go like into quite intimate details in some contexts. How do you create this safe space for people to share what's in their heart, not just sharing basic facts, but what they actually felt, what their lived experience was?
I think since, like, to disclose, they are all based on a true story. So these were actual real lived experience that were discussed and then portrayed in the book as stories, but now more embodied as characters. But I think a starting point was making sure I was in the right space. You know how we always speak about energy? And how, like, the energies are off, or like you've got great energy. So I think I had to have very like warm and authentic energy, and despite that I had to package the conversations as conversations and not necessarily interviews, because it's one thing when you feel like you have to have a certain script and how to answer questions, and it's another when you're just speaking human to human and your heart just feels comfortable to start pouring out.
The funny thing with stories, I had a conversation recently on the podcast. It's that each story we tell and each story we hear has an impact on us. You know, especially if you think about your favorite story. Like a movie that comes to mind for me is John Wick. When I see John Wick doing all those stunts and everything, there's a part of me that imagines what did it be like to, be him? What would it be like to do all of that? Or if the Avengers, if I look at Iron Man, what did it be like to be Iron Man? And the stories that resonate with us, there's an element of it where we see ourselves in it. Did you have that experience listening to all these stories as well?
I did, because then had to go from being knowing it's based on, like, a specific person's story, but then having to write it from a character basis where you could be that person because it's written from their eyes. And I think even linked to how do you get someone to be in such a safe space to just, pour out the deepest and darkest of secrets and just darkest of emotions they've never released, is also the level of questioning and where you start and how you slowly unpacking from there, because then it could be like an onion, where you gradually just, like, peeling off layer by layer, so it doesn't feel as aggressive as the content is when we're like done speaking and you're like, whoa, how did I release all of that?
Yeah, and I think it's, the more you open up, the more easier it is to open up. At first, it might be tough and kind of daunting, but as you build the relationship, it becomes it's kind of second nature.
No, literally, I think there's literally that quote. I'm not sure who said it, but the hardest thing to do is start. A lot of the reason we don't get through what we're doing is because we're scared of starting. But then once you've started, you just want to see what happens and you keep going. And the same with conversations. Once you started it, then you just let it go and see where it goes.
In terms of, being a good storyteller is a skill in its own right. How do you get others to be a good storyteller? Because it's no use, you have the skill and you can tell the story, but if you truly wanted to be sincere, you had to be able to get others to embody this, this being of being a storyteller, which is not something that everybody's able to do.
I think the interesting thing about storytelling is, just to disclose, I am a qualified chartered accountant, spending 7 years being ingrained with everything needed to know to be a CA. But I think the important part that came in when I was writing the book, or even just having the conversations, was A, fortunately understanding I'm an empath, but most importantly, trying to discern what I was trying to relay in the writing despite not expecting to release the book. And that was how to beautifully capture how each of the characters actually felt. So I think a core part of storytelling is not just telling a story, but understanding what you're trying to relay. And then from there, the rest of the story builds.
Okay, so you weren't initially planning on releasing the story. What caused the change? What was the motivation first making the, or yeah, yeah, what was the first motivation for writing these stories and then the motivation for actually publishing it for the world to
Okay. So I guess if I were to start with the motivation for writing it in the first place, so I am Christian, so it was probably God, if we're going to go back to my faith of waking up randomly
yeah.
with an instruction to write a book about daddy issues, but then it was quite ambiguous. Like, what am I supposed to do with such an instruction? But then I was like, oh, yay, research project, let's go. And then that's why there were 9 stories, because I was like, how do I best, navigate this whole daddy issues story? Because if I write one story, it's going to be like, oh, another story of daddy issues. But how would the world feel about reading back to back stories on the same topic and then coming to realize they were
Mm-hmm.
all packaged completely different despite still following the theme? So I guess the starting point was, let's see if I can research it and let's see if I can heal this pandemic we joke about, but it's actually really serious and we need to stop joking about it and try to do something about it, or at least heal it in a sense, because we can't go through multiple generations of saying, oh, this always happens, but it's not okay with any generation. So that was the starting. I was just trying to solve this crisis. I don't know. Yeah, it was very ambitious of me, I know. And like my findings were inconclusive, just to put it out there. And I guess you'll know why from the book. But then the reason I actually didn't want to release it after writing all of them, I was like, who is going to defend what every single character said? Because that writing was very blunt, it was very raw, it was very dark. Like, there was very little holding back, in terms of how they felt. So I did not want to release it because I'm like, it was great, it was cute. I was grateful for everyone who poured out, and like they all left feeling lighter and more enlightened. And I was, I felt like that was mission accomplished. But then years later, when like my career trajectory was taking its own turn, and I had no idea what to do because my plans weren't working out, someone happened to ask me about that book I was writing years ago. And I was like, actually, yeah, let me like pull that out. So I actually pulled it out for fun for a private launch, and I thought it was going to be like a cute one time thing and continue with life. But I suppose when you do something of a bigger purpose, it's like a ripple effect. You just throw that stone in, and the ripples just keep going. And that's what's been happening with the book.
Yeah, you never know where things are going to go. Like, it can go a lot better than you anticipate. You have to be somewhat optimistic. You have to always look for what could go right. It's, as you said, it came from a place of faith as well. And you have to have some sort of a good expectation before you do anything. Because if you believe things are going to go bad, you're not going to bother trying to do anything. It's going to be like, well, it's going to fail in any case. Why even bother? And now it seems there's like a counterculture going on. Yeah, opposing this whole idea of sensationalizing everything. Everybody wants to see the raw thing. We want to hear about people's raw stories, their raw experiences. We want sincere stories, not the Hollywood version of based on a true story, and then it's like everything gets blown out of proportion. Everybody wants to see what people genuinely feel.
Right? I think, like you said, we're in a part where, like, being genuine is now, like, it's popular. Can I say popular? Or being genuine is, how do I best phrase this? I think I can let me just say being genuine is now for the win, because like you said, after a time where things had to be packaged a certain way, and like when you go into any job space, once again it's about packaging. So like all along you always need to put up a front of how best to represent yourself, and it's really refreshing to go into spaces or dive into reads where it just feels so authentic and you connect on a soul level.
Yeah, and I think also the other thing with telling an authentic story and why people might have difficulty like opening up is we all assume that we are so different, that our experiences are so exclusive to us. Sure, we are each unique, but there are going to be a lot of experiences that somebody else has likely gone through. And when I was reading those stories, there were elements of it that I could relate. Elements of it that I would be ashamed to share with others because I'm like, this is so horrible that, this stuff. I don't think anybody else wants to hear of it. And from my own experience reading it, it's somewhat comforting to know that you're not alone in this journey, that there are others that have similar adversities to yourself.
Agreed. I think also that's what made the book and even the sessions following the book, which we title Pour Out Sessions, lay out really well, because feeling like you're alone and your story is exclusive is quite lonely, and it's really heavy. But now being able to go into a space and realizing, oh, I'm not an outlier, or oh, okay, this is normal, but then we shouldn't normalize it, and now you're trying to find a way on how to solve it together, makes it like, the burden easier to carry. Because I think at the end of the day, we are social beings. And with the way the world has gone, the social media and, the distancing, even post COVID, we've kind of forgotten about that human element and how to, like, interact, like, truthfully, fully with our raw physical energies, side to side. And that's one thing I've really tried to focus on. Yes, people be like, you could do better marketing. I know, but I've really tried to focus on that, like, in-person human interaction of, let's speak about this, like, how do you feel, what happened, and even learning on how to take space up for each other and also support each other, while not, making someone feel like they're too much or not enough, or their story is not important or least important. Just finding that balance of, we're just here to speak and here for each other, and we have a common goal of being better humans regardless of where we come from.
Yeah, one of my favorite books is 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. And there's a chapter in it that says, assume the person you are talking to knows something you don't. And that's the fascinating thing about people. We each have our own unique story, our own unique lived experience. And if you can't find anything different about somebody, you just need to ask them, where do you come from? Or tell me something that bothers you, or something like that. And we don't like small talk, yet the natural inclination for people seems to be, how's your day? How are you doing? And it's that usual script. But the moment you ask the hard questions, it's the most daunting thing. Like, you feel you're going to get rejected. But a lot of the times, in my experience, I've seen it works to your benefit. Everybody wants to tell their story. Like, if you think in a romantic context, the one thing you want out of a partner is somebody that understands you, somebody that sees you the way you yearn to be seen. And getting others to share their story can be sometimes as simple as just taking an interest, which is something that seems kind of tough. When you look at others around you, you see, oh, how does this person so charismatic and everything? But it could just be this person, decided to take the chance.
Agreed. I think the word wasn't even taking up space. It's like you say, it's just holding space for someone. Like, how are you? Not even just the how are you. If you want to go a level deeper, asking how is your heart? Because that's not a question we have like a default setting to be like, I'm fine. It's like, how was your heart? And you're like, wait, what? And at the end of the day, we just want to be understood, but then we also don't really understand ourselves. And the beautiful thing about living is you figure yourself out a little more with each day, and you just want people to be able to journey with in order to also discern that, and also discern why you became the way you are, but then also the beauty of how who you are doesn't have to be who you are tomorrow. There's always that room to just, switch it up, whether for the better or for the worst.
Okay, in terms of the book, when you had a vision of publishing the book, who did you think your readers would be? Who did you think would be the people going to the store or seeing this book on the shelf and taking an interest in it?
Primarily, it was definitely the kids. And I'm just gonna, say the kids generally because everyone's a kid to someone, but definitely from like the ages of 14 to probably 40, where you still feel like you're primarily a child as much as some people might also have children. And the reason for that was because there's so many stories, specifically memoirs, where people write from when they're like older and reflecting back, but very little does it take place where it's someone young reflecting up, and you get to see what the younger voice is. And yes, with age comes wisdom and a lot of learning experiences. But one of my favorite things I always see is you need to understand we're all existing for the first time. And the beauty in that is also learning to not discount your youth of how you feel is also valid. How you feeling as a 14-year-old, as much as they're going to tell you, oh, adolescence, oh, you too much, you don't understand life. There's also a reason to also be quite sensitive with where they are at 14, because them at 24 was going to be heavily influenced by how things were navigated as a 14-year-old. And those are things we don't necessarily take conscious focus of. And we just like, hope by the age of 35 you have it together or almost there and you would have learned and understood. But how about like we do this learning thing together from a 14-year-old so I don't have to develop protective mechanisms to then like, defend myself from a life I have to endure through instead of feel supported through.
Okay, I get the sense that it was sort of written with, yeah, with the somebody that's going through certain experiences in mind, that it gives them sort of comfort that there are others going through similar things and there are people that have gone through it as well. And also that they can see how it might impact them, what is happening now, giving an eye towards the future, knowing that, well, this will end for one, but also, even if it ends, these are the challenges you could experience and what others have um, done based on those experiences, how they've coped with it, what worked and what might not have worked. And I think for me personally, when I read the book, I read it out of interest because studying psychology, and I was like, this seems interesting. What sort of psychology is at play here? Because in the back of my mind, I have like the childhood development psychology playing out, and I'm like, okay, let's see if all the theory I'm learning lines up with what is in this book, what people are saying in their stories. But when I read the stories, it was also the impact of, the fathers, where they might do something and they sort of neglect their daughters. And I feel that the story brings that to light, that it's not just somebody having the experience like the daughter's experience, it's also where men will do certain things and not take into account how it might affect them down the line.
Actually, I love how you brought that up because I'll even use, because normally when people think daddy issues, they think absent fathers. So I will pick two stories from the book where the father was actually present. Like he was at home every single day. So, and then everyone's like, but what do you mean the father's absent if he's at home every single day? But then the book beautifully described fathers like that as presently absent. And I guess we can go back to the notion of apartheid, colonization, where what the family structure was pre colonization, where everyone lived in the same neighborhood. There were many uncles, there were many fathers, aunts, everyone was around. The family was very tight knit. But then colonization took place, apartheid took place, fathers had to go to different cities to go find work to provide for the family. And, they usually say you are what you see, or basically how you become is programmed by your environment. But now the issue with a time like that was you did not see what a father was meant to look like because now a father became a provider and provision solely from a financial perspective. And I think that was something that stuck with the generations going forward, even post apartheid, where the fathers, I mean, even like, they say you're the head of the household, you're meant to provide. So there are even notions that do support that. But then there was the neglect on, yes, you're providing for someone, you bought them a house, that's great. No, that a roof is very important. But is your child okay? Outside eating that food, if they're allergic to the food you're buying? Do you know if they actually went to school that day? Do you know when they're really sad and heavily depressed, or you're so consumed by providing that you're forgetting that before anything else, you're the father, and we're social, and it's a family unit. We should be able to sit around and just kumbaya. But then now there was a thing where fathers knew how to play with their, well, it was not everyone, but there were a lot of stories where the fathers knew how to play with their children from a young age, let's say while they're toddlers. But then while the children start growing and they become inquisitive, they felt like their fathers didn't know what to do with them. Because the fathers didn't get into an aspect of trying to get to know their children as they're trying to develop and get to know themselves. And then there was the gap of the whole like emotional relationship that even those who call their dad presently absent, where they're like, yes, my father will come home, ask me how I am, ask how school's going. But like, let's speak beyond that. Do you know my favorite subjects? If I want to go out and you're going to drop me off, do you know who I'm going to see? Like, yes, some people might find these questions bothersome, but they people who don't go through that, who wish they were asked, because then once again packages what care looks like. And I think over time as well, there's been this big concept of present. What is present, and how present looks different for different people. Because then we speak about love languages. So do you see how like it developed as we started becoming a bit more emotional beings, or maybe our generation has more time on our hands to think and feel that other generations didn't? So, and that's why the book was also quite well rounded in terms of this is how the children felt, but then it had to be quite open conversations of trying to negate what was happening in generation before's lives and why they perhaps thought the way they were thinking, why they made the decisions they were making, to try, to try empathize with them and try be understanding, but not taking away from how you feel, because at the end of the day it's still how you're experiencing what you're going through. But then there's also like this bridge that's not being crossed, that's needed between the generations, to be like, I see what you're doing and I'm grateful, but something's off.
Yeah, it's a very difficult conversation to have because on the one hand, it's indeed, your parent would be doing a lot for you, they're providing for you, and that in itself is immensely invaluable, especially if you contrast it with others. There are a lot of people out there that won't have that father figure, and I imagine as a daughter or even a son, you'd feel somewhat guilty that you have this, all of this provided for you, yet you feel unfulfilled in that relationship. It can feel like, am I expecting too much? And also from the parent side, it might be, am I not providing enough? Am I not doing enough? There's a lot of dynamics that are at play by the sounds of it.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, we can speak about all the economic revolutions and like, how demanding they've become over the times, and economic pressures and everyone going through their own things. But then there's also that concept of how much are we outsourcing to other people that we should be doing ourselves? How much teaching are you outsourcing, like to the schooling system? Now they need to teach your children values. They need to teach your children all these random knowledges. And then it ends up also like, yes, it's great you can outsource that, but then what about when it comes to them learning about their family history? How often is family history passed down? And I think it's getting lost, well, not across the board, but it does tend to get lost between people. I mean, people casually speaking about, oh, I don't get along with my family like that. I'm just okay with my immediate family. How we're Africans, Ubuntu, like you know what I'm saying? To just show how they caught things that are getting lost with the evolution of time that shouldn't, because that was the essence of our people and the essence of our being and how things are kept alive. I mean, there's that African proverb of the lion story will always like won't be told correctly if it's told by the hunters. And now, the same way, we know all about the American revolutions, we know about certain aspects of apartheid and colonization. But do you know what your great great grandparents did? Do you know what your family 4 generations ago did around those same colonization times? Do you know where which province they originated from? So do you see when I say like little gaps on things like I myself don't know and I should actually inquire about? But there's certain things I feel like we need as well. Like, even if we're just going to speak from a lineage point of view, and even connecting from a point of lineage, then connects to the soul, then connects to the heart, and then we find something common to then start debating from a human perspective of, okay, this is how my daughter thinks, okay, this is how my father thinks, and then just debate from a common point, because that what tends to be lost when we don't really spend much time together or bond over things that aren't financial or like necessities or politics. And I think that's what the cry at the end of the day is, without really exposing it. It's just about there's some link in our relationship that's not getting passed over with the lineage. I mean, the fact that, will my kids speak a vernacular language? We don't know, because I spend so much time speaking English. So the book is more of a cry of a gap that needs to be filled more than a complaint of what's happening.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like it's very much focused on how do you cope with this void. And I find it also fascinating that you bring up it's there's this, I don't remember who it's attributed to, but it's like a quote. I think it's, yeah, just think of it as a common saying, and it's, nobody is going to remember how hard you work except for your family. They're going to be the only people that fill that vacancy. When you're giving your all out there in the world, if you think 10 years later, when you are no longer doing that, if you retired for 10 years, what is your legacy going to be? It's not going to be all that work that you've done, unless you are a martyr like Nelson Mandela, or somebody that was truly revolutionary like that truly changed the world in an immense way, where you had a direct impact on every single person's life. It's going to be the people that you have relationships with. It's going to be your wife, your kids, maybe your extended family, your friends, and maybe a few people that you worked with who you had a direct impact in their career and development. But beyond that, nobody else is really going to care about it.
No, that's true. I think how you package that reminds me of even one of the stories. And I think we forget kids don't have that much, like, have a lot of time on their hands outside school. I mean, you go to school, do extramurals. Yes, it's very demanding, but you do have a lot of time to think when you get home. Unlike adulting, where there's 50 million things to worry about 24/7. And, now being in that limbo from getting out of childhood into full-blown adulting. I get it. But now, one of the stories, the daughter literally said, my dad never ever hugs me unless there are strangers around. Do you think the dad was conscious of that? I don't think so. But the fact that the child picked that up. So do you see how it's even like the little things? And it's not even just the dad. I mean, in that same story, the daughter said, I was really depressed and no one knew. I was getting bullied and no one knew. To also show, as much as, yes, I kept the title Daddy Issues, but it's more about the family as a whole and how we interact and carry each other, or the lack thereof. Because, yes, the dad is the trunk, and I will stick to it, not changing the title. There was a reason for that focus. But then the rest of the family dynamic are like branches in that tree. You can't look at the tree and ignore the branches, it's all still part of one structure. So it's also like, it's very complex because if I go on now to also speak about, the perspective where we now look at the mother and how the child felt like they were participating into the dynamic with the father or enabling what's not okay, and you just continuing with it to just show how, like, Keenan, I really tried my best to really make it a very well-rounded reflection, even in the conversations. So it's very easy, especially if you're like raised by a single mom, to try, defend, how your mom navigated life and what they did. But then now, when you're asked by someone external, be like, but then how do you think that played out for your dad, or what do you think was going on for him? Now it's also like kind of like, okay, wait, pause. I've been looking at this dynamic, but now let's look at the triangle.
Yeah, and we all tend to also underestimate the negative, negative impact of our actions. The unintended consequences. Where a lot of the stories, I think, one of the stories, it was where the father was asked not to be involved. And, on the one hand, you might think this is good for your child, but what if this child always feels this desire to have their father be a part of them? And it can kind of feel like they were abandoned. If you look at attachment theory, one of the attachment styles is abandonment, and creating that scenario directly feeds into that, where this person never feels secure in relationships. They're always either going to keep somebody at arm's length, or they're going to feel like, is this person's intentions legit? Are they just going to come into my life just to leave again as well?
Literally, and then you end up also all becoming like avoidant attachment because the person who was meant to be your first love, if I guess I'll use a quote from one of the stories where she said, it's she felt like it was better off for people who've just never known their dads, or their dads have never wanted to be part of their lives. But then what happens if you know what heaven looked like, and then one day you woke up and everything changed? And she said that's worse off. And then that probably then affected her attachment to be completely avoidant of how you feel a certain way, and your feelings do contribute to how you then behave in the world. But then she also said with her, she said it with her chest, that I am afraid of love. I do not believe in love. But then she's probably someone who embodies love and is the most flirtatious, loving person in the world. But because of what they went through, they're not able to follow through with who they actually are. And then when they get to a point where they're conscious of, oh, wait, I'm being too loving or too present, they then like detach as a defense mechanism.
Yeah, and I think another fascinating thing is with the stories, there's a lot of statistics that you can find online, and yeah, you can easily find it. You just search stats on fathers, stats on parenting, or whatever, and they will tell you about the likelihood of success for individuals from single mother households, from single father households, who are raised by both parents. And I think it's like quite a strong correlation that if somebody has both parents, I think, yeah, they are 80% more likely to finish school or something like that, to have better career prospects and all of those nice things. But there's also the idea of anecdotal evidence where people's experiences tell you more about people than what a research paper would. And in terms of like the stories that you presented, were there any stories that went in opposition to what you would ideally think about if you look at, research and what it should be in theory?
Yeah, I think we'll start on the 80% of people with like, two parents, most likely to finish. But then I've also really wanted to focus on the 20% who did finish, but then let's say who didn't finish and had both parents. And it just shows how, yes, there's statistics, but there's so much we don't know about. Like where someone does have it, we think they have a dad, we know the dad's home, or there are people who we don't know have a dad, but they have a dad who comes home every night. And what they have to go through is there an abusive relationship at home? Is the dad in and out and only comes home every 2 weeks? One of the stories touches on polygamy. How does that play to a child who doesn't understand what polygamy looks like or how it's meant to play out when, like, education is kind of speaking about other things and, the teaching that kind of looks like, or when you're watching rom-coms. So, when, like, what you're exposed to and your experiences versus what you then see at home, which is quite an outlier. So you're not really sure how to navigate and look at that. Or even the children we don't really speak about much, which I can gladly expose in this interview as one of the storylines, the ones who lose their dads young, and the dad being really present. And once again, I'll quote from the book where the daughter said, I felt really bad for saying I relate with people who don't have dads, whose dads were absent. I also feel like I have those same daddy issues. But all my dad did was die. But when he was alive, he was present and fully so. So then now you see when we're like, so now it gets quite tricky when you're like, this is actually really complex. Across the book, we speak on stepdads, we speak on dads who come in and out, we speak of dads who just never return, we speak of dads who just living their own in their own world, and everyone's just there's just collateral damage, and he couldn't care less until later on in life when now the children are needed. And the fact that kids are also quite conscious of how time plays out. Because even one of the stories, the daughter literally said, well, I hope he doesn't look for me when I grow up because I don't care the way he doesn't care right now. Well, that's not a quote from the book, but that's essentially how she felt. So I think, like you said, the way relationships play out, and I think there's, like you said, there's stats, and yes, stats do contribute to certain things, but then there's the actual dynamic people live through where we can speak of absent fathers, but that looks different for so many people. There's the absence of, I don't know who that man is at all. Or, oh, I heard that man lives next door me but doesn't care to come. Or, oh, I see him come in and out every few months, every few weeks, like he's there, but do I really call him present because he's not someone I feel like I have ease of access to despite being a call away? And that's why I went back. Then I went back to what is present and how does that concept or aspect of presence then affect how we feel and how we navigate relationships, because our families are the first people we learn how to interact with, where we learn our first interpersonal skills before we even start school, and even after school you need to go back to them. And I think why then university is such a crucial time, specifically if you like go away from home, because that's the first time you get to sit with yourself and like how you've lived and how you now need to navigate life with people you don't know and who come from different factories to yours. And now you need to learn how to coexist or navigate each other's similarities and differences to form relationships. And I guess that's the same with the family experience, but we don't have as much grace on family as we do with people outside because it's like, surely by now you should know. Surely God should have given you the program to my life and how I'd react to everything.
Yeah, it would have been so nice if we all came with instruction manuals just to understand ourselves.
Right,
And
right.
especially when it's like your first time sitting with all those thoughts, all those emotions, it can be quite daunting, especially if you never thought how to do it, where if you have tough experiences, it's going to be tough conversations to have with yourself. And family's supposed to act as a conduit for those conversations. The way you view yourself, the way you value yourself, your family dynamics play a huge role in that. Did you feel valued by your parents, by your family? Did you feel like you were part of their world? If you don't feel a part of that world, um, your core family, it's going to be quite tough to feel like you're part of the broader world as well.
Yeah, but Keen, and then what's your take on people who like unfamily their families and just decide to create their family with friends?
Yeah, I think it is. Hmm, it can be a good substitute, but it's also a lot more challenging to find those people. Like there are people that that have really amazing relationships with friends that they meet along the way, or somebody else that comes along and takes on, that father figure role. But for every success story, there are typically like 8, 9 other stories that go a lot more darker. If you look at the stories of addictions and drug dealers and gangsters and all of those things, that's largely people that grew up without, a secure family structure where they were thrown out into the world and they have to find the other people. They have to find the people that play this role. And especially the example of a drug dealer, this will be somebody that maybe shows you love, that shows you this affection and makes you feel like a part of a family if you join them in doing all of these things. They will give you that admiration and adoration that you never had before. And you can easily misconstrue this as being a true expression of love and not somebody merely using you as a vehicle for ulterior motives. Hmm?
You know what? You saying that made me think of the concept we now use of how our upbringing affects the quality of relationships we think are phenomenal. But now there's been like a saying for the past few years where they say the bar is in hell. To just show that what we think is
Yeah.
great might not be great based on where your starting point is. And
Yes.
now trying to find on like, okay, what is, I mean, even if we go back to the book, one of the girls said she didn't know better existed.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
and
like, and
yeah.
what is better?
Yeah, better can be very deceptive. If you look at psychopaths, what psychopaths play on is this idea that you want to feel valued. A narcissist, somebody that is typically self-invested, but what they do to win people's affections is they give you so much love, they make you think you're the most amazing person to ensnare people. To be able to discern that without having, the secure relationships in a family structure, it's kind of tough. And, well, dating is sort of that experience. You meet a whole bunch of different people, have different experiences to try and find what it is that you need, what is conducive for you. But in the midst of all that, there's also the potential for a lot of harm if you do not even know what you are looking for out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Life is so hard. Like, life is actually really hard. And I think that's why, and you see the way the book was packaged, there's
Yeah.
seeking a lot of understanding, trying to understand the other person, and how there was a common trend of really yearning for reconciliation or a healthy family structure despite what happened, regardless of, all the really
Yeah.
bad or the really good. it wasn't natural for any of the kids to say, I mean, yes, they did have moments of saying, I don't want anything to do with this person ever again. But then with time and growth, that yearning for relationship and yearning for mending those specific relationships comes back.
Hmm.
And I don't know, maybe there's something in the air, like once you know someone's family, there's like, when they say blood is thicker than water, maybe there's something in the blood
Yeah, yeah.
that makes you really want to work family relationships out. Or is it perhaps fear of really wanting to work out your immediate family structure before creating your own, afraid of creating a ripple effect of what you went
Mm.
through or projecting without being conscious of it? Because when they're like, why are you projecting? Not everyone's always conscious that they're projecting.
Yeah, and even if somebody has tough experiences or grows up with this lived experience, we are not responsible for what happens to us, but ultimately we are responsible for our actions and how we deal with things. And from the stories, there's always this theme of pain, that we all experience pain, and there's some ways that are more conducive to healing and dealing with the pain. What, yeah, what were the different approaches you've seen to dealing with this pain?
I think, like, first and foremost, you need to release it, whether you speak to someone or you write it down, but you need to take it out of your body, feel it as is, as painful as it might be, even if you can't breathe while you're crying and relaying the story or writing it down. And also just being honest of how you feel and why you feel that way. Because you need to get to a point of acceptance of this is what I went through and this is how it affected me. And also show yourself some grace that it doesn't mean you're ungrateful. It doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you're undoing everything that's been done to get you to who you are today. But then it's important to release it. You know that thing of, I can use habits as a case study. They say you can't lose a habit, you need to replace it. And I suppose with emotions, we can even use a table. You need to create space for something else to come there. But now, if you want to bring something else with all you're feeling there, it's going to kind of mesh up. It's kind of like if there's poison in your blood, although blood is a really terrible explanation because you're going to die if you lose all your blood. But we get the metaphor. If you have blood, if you have poison in your blood, they have to drain all the poison out before pumping in new blood, or the poison's going to remain. And it's the same with the emotions of how we felt about how life has gone. You need to release it. Yes, it might not exit your body permanently, but you need to have that conversation with yourself when you're like, this is how I feel and I'm not okay and it wasn't okay. So you don't have to fight with yourself about what you went through, because a large part of, I can even speak since I wrote the book in my early 20s, is a debate of how you experience life versus how you feel, and also now fighting yourself about how you feel. So now it's like a battle inside you of, no, but then this happened, no, but then that happened, oh, they tried. Yes, that's also fine in the whole like feeling process. You can fully say this wasn't okay, this is how it happened, but they did try counter it like this, but you do need to fully feel the pain. And then after that, exhaling and saying, okay, next level is, how do I think all of that has affected who I am right now? And how is it playing out in my friendships, in my romantic relationships, within my family interactions right now? Because there is a correlation. Are you passive aggressive because you're still mad at something that happened when you were six? And rightfully so, but you've never discussed it. And there have been many triggers happening throughout life. So it's kind of just been this bubble growing. So now also being conscious of, I mean, I remember when I went to primary school and they asked me, how do daddy issues play out? Are you gonna go get a blesser? Is that what daddy issues looks like? And I said, no, actually, some also become very hyper independent where you don't know how to rely on other people, and that's also not healthy. And you're just very conscious of being the most successful version of yourself, not wanting to rely on anyone, but that's too much for anyone. And that's why we're always in community structures. So that's why I say be conscious of how it's like, kind of played out. And then the hardest part, which is what I'm also currently going through in real time, because I am still young and navigating life and even my own story, is then realizing gaps of where I actually do need people, where it stems from, and letting people prove to me and my nervous system that the story can play out differently. It doesn't always happen that way. The same way if you go through heartbreak and you give someone else a chance to, like, try to hold your heart and not break it, but you need to take that risk that yes, I can rely on people. Okay, yes, we have grown and had this discussion and we want to have a better relationship, and I need to give you grace to show up better the way I also do want our relationship to be better. So it's a lot of grace play between like you and yourself and you and other people. So that's where I am right now. So I can't unpack until I go for therapy and they give me like the next step. But that's been working out really well from my personal experience.
Yeah, and I think a simple analogy is if you have a car that's broken and can't go anywhere. If you're not going to acknowledge what is wrong with the car, you first have to look at the car. Okay, what is wrong? Why is this car not starting? And then say it's the battery, you have to actually say, oh, it is the battery. If you're going to deny it's the battery and say, no, it's the wheels that are maybe just flat or something else, it's not going to move at all. You actually have to go look at the car holistically and then look, oh, is it that part? No, is it this part? And then once you find that part, once you've acknowledged it, then releasing it. Like, you have to get rid of that old battery. You can't be trying to resuscitate it and then hope that this car is magically going to get going on its own. There's work that you have to do. You have to replace parts, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a tedious process, but we have to go through it because I think one of like the scariest things I heard and was actually from a psychologist. Well, it wasn't scary. I guess I wasn't in a very peaceful place with myself. Was if you had to tell 80-year-old you how your life is going, would you be happy with the report you give? And then also go back to if you had to tell 13-year-old you how your life is going, would you be happy with the report you give? And the beauty in both of those, you are able to, update the reports and figure out which report would make your heart feel better, which would heal your inner child, which you'd be like an old person looking back and you'd be like, you did well. And not just from a material aspects, but just from the person you became and how you moved in life.
Yeah, and we each have our own story, but the joy of being alive is the story is not finished yet. It's still going on. Even if a story started one way, it can change any moment.
And the beauty about what you said about changing any moment, you need to keep trying. The way we keep trying on improving our lives is also keeping trying on maybe mending certain relationships or realizing if trying in that aspect doesn't work out. Do go try and make friendships, but you always need to keep trying to make sure you heal parts of yourself that you yourself are struggling to live with.
Okay, I'm gonna play a bit of devil's advocate. What if somebody is in that process, in that journey, and they trying and trying and trying, but things don't seem to change? Because I imagine from the people you spoke with, from the stories, there were people that, for some reason, felt like they're going through the same pattern over and over and over.
I think with people like that is, especially, with the whole trying thing, you're like, how many times do you try? I always know, well, I always say to myself, you stop trying when, if you were to know, like if you were to stop trying and like just change the trajectory of your focus, so maybe just focusing on yourself and just maybe, let's say the worst case scenario, you decide to cancel your father. Let's stick to the topic. If you've tried with this relationship and it's not working out, this man is not coming to the party, you've written emails, you've written letters, you've had 50 million dates, or he just never shows up, like you've tried. You let go when, if anything terrible were to happen to, let's say, him specifically, you'd be able to live with yourself saying, I tried. And not beat yourself up saying, I should have tried even more. And that looks different for all of us. But you need to be at peace with the number of times you've tried and that there was nothing more you could have done. And also, you giving yourself grace if, let's say, something terrible were to happen, you need to give yourself grace to be like, but you've tried. But you don't want those cases where you didn't try, you got angry really quickly, you cancel the whole world, and then tragedy strikes, and now you can't live with yourself for the rest of your life because you were so mad you didn't want to try. Yeah, so I'm not saying try forever, but just be able to live with yourself.
So before we end, one last question I want to ask. How will somebody know when it is enough? Because in this pursuit of constantly trying to heal, constantly trying, it can become a perpetual treadmill that you're on, where it seems like you constantly have to keep moving and moving and moving, and there's not going to be an end, but there has to be a certain point where satisfaction is reached, where you sort of accept this is enough, or like, is there really gonna be so much better than this, or how does somebody know?
I'm actually going to answer using I'm actually going to answer using your treadmill analogy. When you're on the treadmill, you keep going, it hurts, you feel like you can't take anymore, but then you push because you put like, a time limit for yourself, but then you do get to a point where you literally cannot. And what do? You get off the treadmill to tend it to yourself and body. So, with the same aspect, once you've tried and you feel like it's more detrimental than helpful, step away and just focus on yourself. Because there's only so much you can do to try and get someone else to go to the party, but you can do everything to get yourself to who you'd like to become and where you'd like to go. So, a point comes where you're not necessarily giving up, but you're just changing focus from working on a relationship that's two people's responsibilities to now just focusing on yourself.
Okay, sweet. Ladies and gentlemen, Onkabetse Rethabile Masobe. Thank you so much for being a guest today. Again, if people want to follow your work, where can I go?
Well, you can follow me on Instagram, although that's not a great place to follow the book, but it's at Rita,
Yeah.
Retha_O. But then if you want to follow everything linked to the book specifically, it's at Daddy Issues ZA. At Daddy Issues ZA. And if you want to know everything happening around the book, any sessions we have around the book called pour out sessions, the upcoming reflective journals, you can go to aminiafrica.com. www.aminiafrica.com. Amini spelled AMINIAFRICA. aminiafrica.com. And I will make sure to update everything that does happen because there will be a bit more movement coming up. But thank you so much for having me, Keenan.
Nice, sweet. Yeah, if anybody's interested, or I would definitely recommend the book for anybody that's interested about learning about people, their experiences. You want to have a different perspective of what life could be like, go give it a read. And I would highly recommend it